Hey everybody, my name is Tyler and welcome to Sector T Studios. Thanks so much for joining me. It's been a little bit since I've done an upload, but I've been working on so much stuff in the background. I just repaired this Roland D50 as well as the Triton Extreme behind me, which is my new main controller. Both were incredibly fun to work on. I'm working on getting the footage together and finishing up the tracks for those, so expect those in the coming weeks. But for today, 8 sound blasters, 1 computer. I've been working on that PC build as well, and it's kind of turned into my PC of Theseus. Like, I've been pulling cards out and putting them in to test them and stuff, and I've been trying to make some room for some Creamware scope cards so that we can go over those on the channel, but I had an important stop that I wanted to make, and that was really to put the OPL3 chip and its compatibles through their paces. I started the system with 2 cards, and then in the Yamaha video I had 4, and now I've got 8, forming something like an OPL3 powered version of Yamaha's TX816. Now, I love OPL3 and Sound Blaster stuff in general, but they continue to impress me in terms of what they're capable of doing, and it's because of an alternate mode that they use when used under something like Frequency Monster 801, a program by Darren Broad that is front-end and GUI for these cards. But what it does is turns these cards into bitimbral synthesizers, so it splits them into a 6-voice 4-operator FM synth and a 6-voice 2-operator FM synth. So what it does is it brings it into the range of something like a Yamaha TX816Z, but with 2 extra operators. So there's some crossover into DX7 territory. Now, there's less features per operator in terms of stuff that we can do, like fine ratio control doesn't exist. We can't do fixed frequency FM modulation. There's a lot of stuff that we don't have, but with the stuff that we do, it's incredibly powerful. And so what I wanted to do was treat them like any other synth in the rack, much as I have for my previous videos, but do a production that leaned on them 100%. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to go through all 8 cards that I have in the system and their kind of unique quirks and features, as well as the patch design that I did for each one for this track and the included effects and everything. And then, of course, get into the track itself, which features some MIDI animation that I've been working on, another project in the background, learning Unreal Engine and doing MIDI triggered animation for that. So I very much hope you enjoy it. Let's go ahead and jump right into these cards. First up, the CT2890. It's just a plug-and-play Vibra Sound Blaster 16. The Vibra cards are known for low noise floor, as well as some bugs with hanging notes in games, but luckily the downsides don't affect the FM chip. We start on the 4-up side with a thin FM saw lead. I love the grit, and it really gives the effect something to grab onto, kind of like scuffing a surface before paint. The 2-op side holds down our bass line. It's plenty bright on its own, but with an EQ to constrain it and saturation to shape the hair, we get a nice fuzz bass tone to anchor the track. Next, the YMF 724, the PCI card that's an OPL3 nesting doll of sorts. And the 724 contains a block for the YMF 289, which in turn contains a block for the YMF 262, the original OPL3. The noise floor is the lowest among all of these cards, but at a price. Its legacy driver can only assign to address 220 or 260, and as soon as another Sound Blaster card is installed in the same system, I need to disable it and re-enable it after startup to get it to work. And I'm still troubleshooting this, but luckily it's more of an annoyance than an actual problem. As for how I used it, the 4-op side is something of a big FM organ patch. I then put it through a lot of effects, but the important ones are all spatial. KHS Ensemble creates 16 detuned voices, like a hypersaw, and then a delay into a cathedral-style reverb, bring it to galactic proportions. The kick was a lot of fun to build, and different from how I usually build a synth kick. There's no pitch envelope for the typical sharp pitch drop. And while the manual pitch bend is fast enough and has enough range to fake it, I chose to lean into making a more boxy kick, made exclusively from low-end noise and the tools at hand. On its own, it sounds very little like a kick at all. And there's a low bump and aliasing noise from being pitched well below the standard keyboard range. But a crazy EQ curve takes care of that, and with some compression and saturation, I spent some time balancing the sub and attack portions. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. And the CT2800, also a Vibra card. We'll start with the 2-op side. I loved making all of these patches, but this one I was pretty proud of. I reserved my 4-op synth options for melodic or harmonic parts, so I wanted to challenge myself to make a decent FM snare on only 2 operators. Both use a square wave, and I experimented quite a bit with tuning ratios and the envelopes until I had a simulated snare rattle that I was happy with. It sounds pretty short and snappy on its own, but give it an EQ bump to fake the drum body sound and a big room to resonate in, and I think it turned out pretty great. The 4-op side contains a square lead that never ended up being a lead. It's only used to support other parts, which is a little sad because I love how it sounds. It's multiplied into 2 voices with a wide spread and slight detune with both filter and EQ to tame high-end content, and something that FM really benefits from and that I use all over the place. A diffuse delay gives it dimension, and it immediately makes anything else it's playing with sound huge. The OS64, our first non-OPL3 card, uses Creative's CQM, or Creative Quadrature Modulation chip. It's brighter, brasher, and clearer than the OPL3. And remember the guitar patch from the last example? The 2-op side of this card is where that all started. It ends up sounding roughly like an electric guitar picked right at the bridge, so we send that through an amp sim and... But of course, all of the girth comes from that square wave patch from earlier, making this more or less a 4-operator FM patch in the end, and split between the 2 cards. The 4-op side opens up the piece with a patch that started out as a preset called Goblins. It immediately made me think of like a 1980s Swords and Sorcery synth part. I adjusted the operators to taste in Frequency Monster and then applied a pretty hefty EQ slope to round it out a little bit, and it's very bright. A black hole style reverb really sends us into space synthesizer territory. Next, the FM801 from Forte Media, here in a Teratech 512i. While the OS64 sounds brighter and brasher than the OPL3, this one sounds bigger and rounder. And this one used to be my very favorite of all of these cards, but there's a slight click after notes fully release, and changing note priority or envelope settings unfortunately doesn't help. It can be hidden or worked around because it's pretty quiet, but it's always there. And that being said, it does sound incredible, and it was the first card I went to for this exposed music box patch. All I put on this one is just reverb, which I admit is a pretty healthy 30% mix, but this is one of the reasons I love FM so much. The range is insane and it really excels at simulated melodic percussion. The 2-op side does something that sounds hilarious out of context. Kind of like a demon violin oboe, but I needed something that could pierce the mix for a specific kind of lead sound. And by now you can tell pretty clearly I was building all of these patches to work in conjunction with effects, and this one has the longest chain. But it's pretty simple actually. A tremolo, ensemble, and filter plugin help to dull and spread out the sharp edge, and a compressor evens it out overall. A delay-based reverb sends it to the back row of the mix without losing too much clarity, like a bright, faraway point of light in an otherwise black sky. The ALS 4000 is said to sound the most OPL3-like of the compatibles, and I'd say that's probably true. It's a good option if you want to stay as close as possible to the original YMF 262 sound. Unfortunately, this one had the highest noise floor, but the card I have is one of those budget triangle-shaped PCBs, so take that with a grain of salt. It was also the quietest of all the cards in terms of overall volume. I'll definitely have to find a better one for more testing. Despite all of that, it had one of the most important jobs, and that was to be our hi-hat. Using a sine wave with feedback modulating a square, it ended up something like hard brushes hitting a partially closed hi-hat. Now again, with the effects, I've never been afraid to use presets, and I'll usually tweak them to be what I want, especially lower reverb and delay mix percentages, but sometimes not, and this is bone stock from Timeless, and I love the way it interacts with the different hi-hat fills. It immediately gives us an echoey ensemble effect, and on sections where things get louder, we can take advantage of the 6 voices we have on the synth to play a second part above it to widen the sound up the frequency range. On the 4-op side, this patch started life as the default soprano saxophone patch, but with some adjustments to the operator envelopes and levels, we land here. And with an EQ bump, it pushes more towards a soulful harmonica type of sound. Now, my absolute favorite out of all of these cards. In my testing, I was excited after trying an ESFM ISA card from ESS, but unfortunately it's one of the older styles that needs 2 8-bit DMAs, so I didn't move forward with it. But I had another reason for moving on, and that's the ESS SOLO-1, another ESFM card. Now, fair warning, these cards did everything they could to make me hate them at first. And thanks to a cassette player grade amplifier, they're extremely noisy, and the amp was hardwired on my cards with no separate line output. If you have a K-Revision chip, they just don't work in DOS or in Frequency Monster. I lost way too many hours to troubleshooting that before finding out and cross-referencing some info from an old Vogons thread. But if you have an H-Revision or earlier, they do work and sound nothing short of stunning. And so stunning, in fact, that it was worth me removing the amp and wiring direct from the sound chip to the filter caps to remove the noise. The difference was night and day, and these cards were among the loudest of all even without it. I have both of my SOLO-1s in the system, and when I bring this computer to its next iteration, I might trade one of the other PCI cards for a third, but 2 will do for now. And one of the first patches I started with was this 4-operator space pluck. It wears a lot of hats, first as a high chirping effect, and then as a plucked bass, then as a pad. Next, this piccolo trumpet kind of lead. It has a nice sine wave pop at the beginning before brightening into a dull FM saw. The vibrato is by hand, and I set the pitch bend range and frequency monster to minimum and used the full joystick range until I got something that felt right. A slapback delay for a bit of echo and a plate reverb that favors the high end sends it soaring. I loved the ESS SOLO-1 for pads, and on the second card and final one in the rig, that's all that it does. First, on the 4-op side, after playing around, I got this timbre that sounded like the sustain of a harpsichord, but with a lot more low end. Again, there's a lot for the effects to grab onto, and a 6-voice ensemble plugin and a modulated delay-based reverb give us some almost choral tones as well. And for the last patch, I needed strings, something to show scope and scale, and I chose this. It's simple, probably the most basic and stereotypically FM-like of them all, but with a single effect, a shimmer delay, it becomes gargantuan. And I set up the operator ratios and envelopes listening through that delay to feed it exactly what I wanted to. Most people back in the day figured out that FM synths really became what they were meant to be when layered, like in the TX816, or used through the ever-growing selection of digital effects chains. This is why I love using my hybrid setup here. I get to use all of my favorite sound-making devices and then pair them with world-class effects. Now that you've heard the players in my little FM orchestra, onto the track itself. This one is called Safe Until Sunrise. Both a reference to my favorite time to be creative, in the dead of night when the rest of the world is asleep, but also a reference to a location I'm building out for a larger project. And up until recently, I've used a program called CMusic alongside video or stills I've taken to animate my music, and for a long time I've wanted to learn how to do music and MIDI-driven animation in Unreal Engine. I've spent a lot of time recently doing just that, as well as expanding my skill set in Blender. It's been incredibly rewarding, and I'm trying to set myself up to do more of what I want to be doing on this channel. I've always had the dual purpose in mind of learning and sharing about the tools that my heroes use to make the music that inspired me as a kid, but also to use that equipment in my own music. But all of my music is story or character driven, and I'd love to be able to share those stories in the form of episodic animations or maybe even a game project and essentially show the other half of what's going on in my head when I'm writing these pieces. It'll probably be simple music animations for a while, but I'm excited to see where this path leads. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoy Safe Until Sunrise.